did tell you just after 11 o'clock that we'd talk about Commonwealth Games. And yesterday, about this time, news broke that the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, had declared unilaterally, it would appear, that Victoria, having successfully argued that they could host the 2026 Commonwealth Games, would no longer be doing so. Which has led to essentially an existentialist question for the Commonwealth Games. Over the last 20 years, I think only, with the exception of New Delhi, the only countries that have hosted the Commonwealth Games have been England, or Britain, and Australia. And there's a reason for that. They're probably, along with Canada, the richest nations in the Commonwealth. Has always been very expensive. Now, where the the Finance Minister of New Zealand, Grant Robertson, suggested that it was possible that New Zealand might bid for the 2034 Commonwealth Games, but given that he won't be around in 2034, or even in 2030, or I guess 2028, when they're going to be awarding those sorts of games, that was always an easy promise to make. But New Zealanders got quite excited about it, and New Zealand sports enthusiasts in particular, that, oh, great, we'll have the Commonwealth Games back here in New Zealand. But the cancellation by Victoria of their Commonwealth Games, they suggested it was going to cost $6 or $7 billion to host, and Premier Daniel Andrews said that's just a ridiculous amount of money, and I can spend money on schools and hospitals that will have enduring legacies for my state. Commonwealth Games doesn't. Has now raised the issue of whether or not the Commonwealth Games will survive this cancellation. Now, New Zealanders love the Commonwealth Games for a reason. We have been great supporters of it. Our athletes have done well at it. And we love watching our athletes come back with gold, silver and bronze medals after appearing on the world stage. For athletics, in particular, the last Commonwealth Games was not considered to be all that wonderful, given that many of the world's leading athletes didn't actually compete at it. But for other sports, you'd have to say the Commonwealth Games is the pinnacle event for their sport. It's why they attract young people to the sport. It's where their most ambitious and athletic aspire to be. And it is, if you like, the exclamation point for a successful sporting career. Joining us to talk about that and the effects upon his particular sport is the senior coach, or the head coach of New Zealand Bowls, Mike Kernaghan. Mike, welcome to the show. Thanks very much for joining us.
No, good morning. Pleasure.
Listen, mate, the big issue here is I've always associated bowls with the Commonwealth Games. Yep. And it has always sort of been the place where you guys would go to strut your stuff on an international stage. It was very much considered to be the pinnacle of your sport. Without it, what happens?
So, well, I think you've made some really good points before introducing me. And to your question, we have World Championships every couple of years, and obviously the Commonwealth Games every 4 years. And if you asked our elite players which is their pinnacle event, you'd probably get a 50-50 response. Half of them would say, I'd rather be a world champion. The other half would say, I'd rather be a Commonwealth Games champion.
Yeah.
The Commonwealth Games is incredibly important to our sport, and I think the sports like netball, as another example, which aren't Olympic sports, and the Commonwealth Games, because our sport typically are very much weighted towards Commonwealth countries, they are very much a pinnacle event for us, as it is for netball. I'd throw rugby sevens in there as well. I'd suggest that cycling, look at it as a pinnacle event as well, particularly after their results last year. But for us, very much a pinnacle event, but one of two.
Right. So are you working at the moment on the assumption that there won't be a 2026 Commonwealth Games?
No, I think it's too early to make that call, to be completely honest. We have just come out of a relatively successful Com Games last year, with particularly our girls getting 3 medals in 4 disciplines out of the 4 disciplines. We've got a World Champs coming up in just on a month. So we're heading over to the Gold Coast for the World Champs at the end of August. So that's where our focus is at the moment. Am I concerned about the future of the Commonwealth Games? I think everyone would be after yesterday's announcement. But I know the NZOC here and the Commonwealth Games Federation are very confident that they'll be able to secure another host in the next wee while to ensure that there is, in fact, the Commonwealth Games in 2026.
Oh, that's an interesting development then, because the Mayor of Christchurch has suggested, Mr Major, that they should actually go to Christchurch in 3 years' time. But the New Zealand Olympic Committee reported, at least this morning, as saying that that's unlikely. What's your take on that?
Yeah, look, I think I would suspect that the NZOC and Grant Robinson are a little bit closer to reality than
Mr Major,
the Mayor of Christchurch, with all due respect. Hosting a Commonwealth Games is a huge undertaking, and the challenges of hosting it in one city in New Zealand, I think, would be a little too daunting. The model that was used in Birmingham last year, even though Birmingham was the host city, there were 3 different villages. One of them was outside of Birmingham, so it was very much utilising the existing facilities within England, with Birmingham as the host of a significant number of those events. So I think the model of having it in one city is probably a little jaded now. I think, as Victoria have found, trying to host it in one state or one city, as they're trying to do, is become a little cost prohibitive.
It's interesting what you say about you think there might be a replacement, because I think all the Australian premiers came out yesterday and said, well, not us, thanks very much. We're not interested.
Yep.
And so that sort of goes, well, wait on, if no one in Australia is interested and New Zealand probably doesn't have the infrastructure to do it either in 2026, then who could, in your view?
And I think your introduction, you've got Great Britain, you've got Canada.
That's it. So
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're wrong in that assertion. So it will be interesting over the coming months as to where the Commonwealth Games Federation get to with this. I mean, it would be, in my mind, an absolute tragedy for a significant number of young sports people, young athletes who had their sights set on Victoria in 2026, because, as you're well aware, and as I'm sure most of your listeners are well aware, it's not just something that you spend 6 months preparing for, it's years. And to have that taken away could be a little, challenging and disappointing for a lot of our athletes.
No, and fair enough. I think the other thing that strikes me, interestingly, Mike, is that you've got an alternative. You've got a World Championships to go to, at which is primarily, I would imagine, dominated by Commonwealth countries anyhow, is it?
Yes, but we're very much like netball, as I said earlier, to a large degree like rugby, where if you look at your top tier nations across those sports, bowls is exactly the same. You've got the 4 home countries, you've got Australia, South Africa, Canada, New Zealand. India are starting to come to the fore in our sport, as have Malaysia for quite some time now. So you've got about 10 if you'd like to call them tier 1 countries. They just all happen to be Commonwealth countries. So we're very much like, as I say, your netballs and your rugby sevens.
But here's another option. I looked at it yesterday and thought instantly, and I'm sorry, I'm not prescient, but I do think that I might have some suggestion there. Have you thought about the Asian Games? I noticed, for example, they play bowls at it. I went through and they've played bowls at it and they've got bowls at the thing. So it's very rich. They've got massively wealthy Asian countries like China, Japan, Thailand and India involved in those sports. Is that a possibility for you?
So you raise an interesting point. And I think we're starting to blur a little bit as to what the benefit of the Commonwealth Games is versus your typical regional, and I talk about world regional sporting events here, like your Asian Games. The Asian Games are fantastic because, a bit like the Commonwealth Games, they're across a range of sports, and bowls is one of those sports. Do we fit in there? It's interesting that if you look at football, and Australia have been in the Asian Confederation or Football Confederation for a number of years now. We've stayed in Oceania. Is that something long-term that could be what we do in terms of bowls? Why not? I like your suggestion. I think one of the really cool things about the Commonwealth Games is that you get to meet and mingle and mix with a number of athletes from a range of different sports that you would not otherwise meet. And it's always been a bit of a highlight for our athletes, and I'm sure for other athletes in New Zealand, to be able to rub shoulders with some of our more, recognisable sporting stars. And that's been really cool. Last year at the Games, sitting and having a really, really great conversation with Hayden Wild, our triathlete, just over a cup of tea in the village, because the triathletes were staying at the same village as the bowlers were. So that sort of thing's really cool, and that's one of the highlights, I think, for a number of athletes, not just bowlers, that they get, as I say, to mix and mingle with athletes from other sports. And that's what sets it apart, I think, from your typical World Bowls Championship or a World Regional Asian Bowls Championships, etc.
But, I mean, those sorts of nice experiences are going to cost $7 billion. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day.
No, you're right. All I'm saying is that was one of... it's not the reason why you go there. You go there.
No, I understand. I understand.
Do the best you can.
Yeah.
But one of the highlights is that you actually do get to experience, the company of other athletes.
But as you say, you've got World Championships. So does athletics. So it strikes me that the people who are going to most suffer from the Commonwealth Games going, if it does, and I think it probably will actually, is not bowls, because you'll have other options. Including the Asia Pacific, it could be at Asia Pacific Games, for example.
Yep.
It would be, and you've got your own world bowls, it would be our New Zealand athletes, sporting athletes, because they can't compete on the world stage, but the Commonwealth Games is a second-tier operation at which they can. I think New Zealand athletics would suffer probably more than anyone else.
Yeah, look, that's an interesting point you make, because the Commonwealth Games for some sports, like athletics, is a stepping stone to those World Athletic Championships and Olympic Games, because it's a tier, in a number of events, it's a tier below your world-class athletes that you'll get in the Olympics. For other athletes, like swimmers, for example, it's right up there. There are a number of swimmers around the world who obviously Australia, obviously Canadians,
And the
Brits, who are at the top of their game. So I think it'll be different for each sport. For a number of sports, it's a really great stepping stone. For a number of other sports, like, as I say, our rugby sevens, our netballers and our bowlers, it's another pinnacle event, because we're, very much it's a Commonwealth sport. And for others, it will be something that they will never get to the Olympics, but the Commonwealth Games was always something they could aspire to.
Now, bowls in general, it intrigues me. I'm of the age now where I guess I'm looking for something to do, and I've suddenly realised that I'm not a golfer. And the reason I'm not a golfer is I don't have the temperament. Mind you, that could be true of bowls too, which must be very frustrating as well. Bowls used to be massive in this country. It was generally regarded as an old man or old woman sport, or something you did when you'd retired from your primary sport. You go on and play bowls in your 40s and 50s, 60s, etc. What's bowls like now, Mike?
So at the Com Games last year, in our women's team, 4 of the 5 women in our Blackjacks team were in their 20s.
Wow.
So the game's changed significantly, and the majority of our high-performance bowlers are in their 20s, 30s and early 40s, and there's not too many exceptions to that. We've got Val Smith, who's been in the team for 100 years now. She's in her early 50s, and she's the oldest athlete we've got. But
I guess that makes you a bit like golf, doesn't it? Where most golfers are my age, 60 plus, 55 plus.
Yes.
but you're representatives of your young, athletic, fit people. Is that right? Is bowls a bit like
correct.
that too?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And you will always get exceptions, but it's been trending younger for quite some time now, and it's actually great.
I actually went to school. In fact, I lived across the road. His father owned a dairy. Keith Slight. He's working for you, I think, now.
Yeah, so Keith has been a brilliant player for a long time now, and played a heck of a lot of bowls with a guy by the name of Peter Bellis.
Yes, that's right. Peter Bellis was in my father's rugby team. He went to Wanganui Boys College. He played in the first 15, and my father was the coach.
Yeah, and Peter actually played senior rugby. He played first-class rugby for Wanganui
He did indeed. He played for Kairau, as that was his club. Yep. He was vicious. He was a dirty player, Peter Bellis. And I see he took that dirty, aggressive bowls with him. He's done very well.
No, look, he's acknowledged as our greatest ever male player.
Yeah.
And he's still heavily involved in our high-performance program.
Oh,
Pete's currently our chairman of selectors, and his wisdom and guidance to our players and also to me as the head coach is invaluable.
I tried to convince him once to stand for the Wanganui City District Council, and he said, as a councillor when I was mayor, and he said to me, he looked at me and he said, clapped his rather large hands on my shoulders because he's quite a tall man, or he was a tall man, and said, "I'd rather die." So obviously he chose bowls as his pursuit.
I can imagine him saying that too. Yes.
Thank you, Mike. Listen. It's a fascinating place. I think the Commonwealth Games now, it could go either way, and I'm not sure it will survive this. Obviously, you're not either.
No, well, no one knows. I don't think anyone's sure. I mean, clearly the Commonwealth Games Federation and the NZOC are putting on a brave face now, as they should, because the games, as we've talked about, are very important to a wide cross-section of people in New Zealand. I just hope that a solution can be found in time for us to head off somewhere in 2026.
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. Nice to talk to you. Best of luck to you. That's Mike Kernaghan, who's the head coach of the New Zealand Bowls. You see, they're okay. They're okay. They've got something else to go to. There are a lot of athletes in this country who don't. This will be the pinnacle sport. Badminton's another one. There's sports there, Josh. There are sports at the Commonwealth Games that they are not. You'll never compete on the world stage. Badminton's a really good example. Bowls, not a good example. Athletics, running athletics, throwing athletics.
Athletics would be the major one I can think of.
Yeah. The second tier. We've got second tier people, but hey, that's what you'd aspire to be. You'll never get to the World Games or to an Olympic Games because you won't meet the qualifying standards, but you can get to a Commonwealth Games. But that's not really a very good reason, is it? I mean, at some stage, so even if I'm just talking to you now and saying, well, wait on, it's sort of second-tier games. Well, they're going to pay $7 billion for a second-tier games. The Mayor of Christchurch, Ian Major, has come out this morning saying that he thinks Christchurch could host it. They could do the rowing at Karapiro. He said we could share it round. We could do the rowing at Karapiro. He said we could do the athletics and swimming in Christchurch. We could do the cycling down in Invercargill. We're happy to share it round. Westport would get something. Maybe they get the bowls. I doubt it. I'd say, just quietly, this is the end.